hair when her hair was like cut.
to change.
She had a long piece of hair. We're like, that's where you have rat tail.
Yeah.
Then she's like,
I tried to go
So we
back.
just went,
I tried to go back and change.
I love it though. Hey, honestly, you look good with a ponytail. I'm not gonna lie.
Oh well.
Never cut my hair off.
He's like,
So you haven't tried that.
You should see my hair.
I know. I used to know someone where his hair would like flop over and it's like all like right here. He'll ponytail all the time. His sides.
No, there's a hair is so soft. There's a boy in my class. His name's Alexander.
Usually they're.
Boy in my class. I'm gonna do
That's the only reason I know because I didn't know it did that.
sticking up instead of
Oh wow.
She says you just want to take
Just
two
sticking
spoonfuls and put it back in the
How'd you do
freezer.
that to
I
your
said, but I know it's there now. Just go back and get two more, and two more, and two more. You're right.
and I went.
We'll get some.
I don't know.
Sorry about that. How'd you break your nose?
So I was pushing
I may try the other one.
Michelle, what are you reading today?
and then they came and gave me lucky didn't go.
Does it hurt?
Funny thing
No,
is,
that's good.
I got hit in the nose with a big
She's coming with Eliza. Just because she went, we woke up at like 6 a.m. this morning, dropped. Oh no, we woke up at like 5. Started getting ready at 6. We dropped Desiree's house. Desiree off at 11. Because she wanted to have breakfast with Eliza, so she had me.
dropped your house.
No, dropped. Really? We dropped her off at Eliza's house at 7.
Dropped your house off.
The one you put in your mouth, you sit there.
Can you drop your house?
Don't think you're safe either.
Just cut around the black line, right? The outside.
You turn so red.
But look, it's bad because I usually do.
You gotta be careful with your phone, kiddo. Well, good.
How long do you never do Get out of
He said it's okay, I'll take his risk. I'll take his word.
Hey, talk about mercy. What a blessing. And look at the class. I love
You
you.
should have did it.
I love you. I keep it. I'm getting my mercy.
Band-Aid. I don't know. It's a,
What it looks like.
some for Sunday school. I don't know.
Looks like a Band-Aid to me.
Good morning, good morning.
She's coming with, Eliza. Did Brody do it again?
How you been?
No, I didn't. Oh, you're great. I got new, yep, I got,
What was it yesterday? I had her last one. I don't know which. I had her last.
I got this one all nice and big one and everything. I went to do this one, it was like, what is in my eyes?
Oh, you're breathing?
That's a little, extreme. I said, Miss lay it with it, Mama. I don't know what I'm doing. So I took the tan or brown, whatever it's called, the bottom part. I come up here and line it back up. I said, I had to come back up here and fix this one.
Sometimes my shadows are a little bit darker than I like, and I put a lighter one over it.
That's why.
You ain't got to cut out.
Was she a Christian? Good. Does she know where she is?
She went, yeah.
Trying to help her. She did some other stuff this morning. Can you help me? I said, "We're the worst."
You're not live, right?
Yeah, they're live.
Okay, I'll give you a video.
It's been live for a little bit. I think it was live. 'Cause I don't see him. I'm assuming we're live. 'Cause he went in there. We're live.
Get the class.
My grandma said I don't have to go.
Y'all going to class?
Too windy yesterday.
My grandma said I don't have to.
Wind's picking up out there. Now.
You'll learn more in there. It'll be a whole lot easier for
We
you.
had some good about 30.
One of them kids. Brody, you learn something.
I said, "Bernie died."
He's going.
You can't take it in the class, no.
Well, she turned it off for me.
Here, let me do this.
The last one. Yep, last one. Did you get a new book last week?
Yeah. We should get the new ones.
Tastes good.
We'll start the new books next week. So if y'all don't have one, just let me know. Angie, I got yours in my office. But it's for next week. All right. Well, good morning. Hopefully everybody had a pretty good week.
Morning.
Y'all, if you didn't hear, you probably did. Please remember Lieutenant Anderson and Deputy Craig Smith. Anderson was my sergeant 3 separate times, and then he left the college when he got promoted to lieutenant. So I've worked under him several years. I enjoyed working with him. When he got shot in the arm, the bullet went into his chest, went through one of his lungs, and lodged in the back by his spine. That's why he's having the worst recovery, but he did wake up yesterday and asked how the other deputy was doing. That was the first thing he asked. So he's got another surgery today. I think this will be his third. Craig Smith got shot in his shooting arm 4 times, and they had to reconstruct it. So I don't know how bad that one's gonna be. With all that said, the 2 other deputies that were on scene and Lieutenant Anderson did an outstanding job taking the guy out. So the guy got shot several times in the chest and the head and everything else. So when you do that,
Menace to society.
you ask for, he's a sovereign citizen, so he didn't agree with the government, didn't like the government, didn't like authority, didn't like rules. And he got what he asked for. So thank goodness that the deputies will recover, but it's gonna be a very long road. The sad part is Chad's daughter's supposed to graduate in the next couple of weeks from high school, and he will probably not be able to be there, so. Just remember them, remember each other. Listen, yeah, that's law enforcement. That can happen to anybody nowadays. Anywhere you're at, people can get crazy and get stupid, but more likely, those of us that are wearing a billboard that says what we do for a living. But just hope that everything works out and they come through. All right, we're in Exodus 16 and it also goes into 17. This is the last lesson of this book. We'll start the new books next week. This one is titled God Provides for His People. We are to trust and obey him and realize that God has proven time and time again that he can meet any one of our needs. I mean, we got to realize that he can meet our needs even when we don't think they can be. All right. What is one of the best things you've ever eaten?
Ice cream. Steak.
Steak, ice cream,
Chocolate
I like
cake.
pizza.
pizza, that's good. Chocolate,
Chocolate,
Grandma made a
cheesecake with strawberries. Cheesecake. Well, what makes it so good?
Sweet.
It's sweet. Not good for you. That's what always makes it good.
Mama made it.
Mama made it. Well, that's another question. Was its goodness connected to the person who created it, or was it simply because of the ingredients involved?
Someone who created it.
Today, we're going to see that the children of Israel received food that was a gift from heaven. This was one of many ways that God provided for his people. Now, despite all that God had done to deliver his people from slavery, they were quick to complain when anything seemed to go wrong. Sounds like us today, if we're honest. When chapter 14 ended, it says the Israelites had witnessed the miraculous working of God as he delivered them from the hand of the Egyptians. Chapter 15 served as a psalm of praise for what they had experienced. And then in chapter 16, they reverted back to their old ways of grumbling and complaining. Yet, the Lord was about to do an amazing work on their behalf once more. The story before us is just one more example of God's loving provision and care for his people, despite their foolishness. That sounds like us. Remember, we're in Exodus 16, 1 through 12 is what it says. But as always, I'm not going to read it because there's a lot in there. This is where he promises to give them food because they're grumbling and complaining that they are all going to die. They ain't got nothing to eat. Kind of sounds like people today, especially if you have little kids. I'm starving, I'm going to die. Just got done eating a candy bar. And
There ain't nothing to eat. The cupboards are full.
there's nothing to eat. There's cupboards full of stuff in the freezer.
Sounds like me.
So chapter 16 opens with the Israelites arriving at the wilderness of Sin of the 15th day of the second month, exactly 30 days after leaving Egypt. They've only been gone 30 days. They should have already been in Promised Land. It only took 11 days. Scholars are uncertain of the exact location, but the word sin here is a translation of a Hebrew term and does not refer to wrongdoing. Scholars see a relation to the word Sinai, although there are different geographical locations altogether. But traveling through the desert was difficult for the Israelites. Food and water were scarce, and by this time the reservoirs that they brought, or the reserves that they brought with them, were depleted. Remember, over 600,000 men, not including women and children, all left Egypt with Moses and Aaron. Now they grumbled about the situation as they remembered the plentiful food in Egypt. This grumbling seemed natural to them because of the abundant resources that they had under slavery. Now it made no sense to them for Moses and Aaron to take them away from abundance and allow them to die in the wilderness. They went as far as to wish that God would have taken their lives in Egypt rather than let them suffer and die in the desert. But Moses made it clear in verse 6 that the complaining about their situation was against the Lord, not the leaders. They needed to learn to trust God to take care of them. So why should we avoid grumbling when things don't seem to be going our way? And why should we trust God instead?
Grumbling ain't gonna get it done no faster.
No, it doesn't really help.
Nope.
And in the end, it all gets taken care of, and you look back and go, why did I grumble?
Yeah.
What was the question again? I'm sorry, Pastor.
Why should we avoid complaining when things don't seem to be going our way?
Be thankful for what you got.
We leave it to God, and at His time and His way.
Well,
When you're grumbling, you could be doing what you're supposed to be doing. Take longer.
when we grumble and complain, we're basically telling God we don't trust Him. That's exactly what it boils down to. Remember how He's always faithfully provided for you in the past. He's not going to stop now. Okay, he's going to keep doing it. So in their distress, the Israelites grumbled and complained when they should have turned to and trusted the Lord. Now God used this as an opportunity to show his power to them. He promised to meet their need and reassured them that he was their Lord and God. It is interesting to note that God's care for their need was not dependent on them, but on his grace. Aren't you glad it doesn't depend on us? That it's God's grace that he's still going to do it? I don't understand it. I wished he would at times treat us the way we treat him, because we might change. But his grace won't let him. Now he would graciously respond to their grumbling by raining down bread from heaven. Even in his grace, however, there was a test to see if they would obey him and trust him by faith. Now this test would foreshadow the Sabbath regulations that they would receive later on in chapter 20. How does God normally use difficulty and needs to test us? How will he use those? What's that?
How would he what?
How would God use difficulty or needs to test us?
Build our faith, make our faith stronger, to depend on him more.
One, it pulls you out of your comfort zone. Takes you out of the little boat of comfort that you've been sitting in, riding along. Now the bread from heaven later is referred to as manna. It all came early in the morning and at some point during the night. Because it would melt in the heat of the day, they could only gather enough manna for a single day, meaning that they would have to trust the Lord for daily bread. It would also serve as a reminder that the mercies of the Lord are new every morning. So the term glory that was used in verse 7, it typically referred to God's manifested presence, a subtle reminder of the fact that God was still with them and he had not abandoned them to die in the wilderness. So on the sixth day, however, they were to gather enough manna for 2 days, since the bread would not come on the Sabbath or the seventh day. So what are some daily mercies that God gives us?
Wakes us up.
Wakes up every morning.
Wakes
Wakes
you
you up, gives you breath.
Gets these bones to moving. Rice Krispies.
And Rice Krispie treats start in the morning. Now in verse 9, it's an invitation was extended to the Israelites to come before the Lord. So some scholars believe that as Aaron was delivering Moses' invitation to the people, Moses may have slipped out to pray. In response to his praying, the glory of the Lord appeared. It's an expression that referred to the awesome presence of God and symbolized his personal, active, and dwelling presence in Israel. All of this served as an object lesson and a reminder to the people that God was with them and that he would continually provide for their needs. Remember, God is with us and supplies everything that we need in order to follow him. Notice what that said, in order to follow him. If you're following your own, you might not get what you could have gotten. You got to follow God, and he will supply all your needs according to his riches. Now, he owns everything, so nothing is impossible with the Lord. Not even you or I. He'll get our attention, and he'll make a way, and he'll get us to do it, whether we like it or not. So anybody got anything in that first section? Y'all got going through this pretty quick again. So they complained about food. Now we're going to see them complain about water, not having water. Lord, you would think they would have learned. You know, when they came through a sea on dry ground, that they would know God's going to take care of it. Kind of sounds like the church today. We know what God did for us last week, yet we totally forgot about it because we're going through something that we think we've never experienced before. And he gets us through it again, and we still forget. Aren't you glad?
Why are people so stubborn? They just have to, they know, I mean, they say they believe, but still so stubborn.
We're,
Laziness.
Something bad has to happen before.
And even sometimes when that happens,
Yeah.
it don't last that long. I mean, you go back to September the 11th, how full the churches were for at least a month after that happened. Where are they at today? I mean, it's like we live for the moment. We don't think about later on, or it's pride. When it boils down, we don't like not having our way. We're born and raised that it's our way. You know, it happened like that in the garden, and it's been going on ever since. And you would think we would learn. Some do, some don't. Some are harder to get a hold of. But as I said, God will get our attention. It's best that we get His before He gets ours. Always works out easier.
And it's laziness. They don't want to get up and make an effort.
No, it's but and I've said this saying, and I'll say it to the dad, that we do what we want to do. We're gonna get up and do what we want to do. Trust me, I hate getting up and going to work. I get up and I sit there. I'm like, I'm tired.
When I tell people where I drive to come to church, and I tell them we stay there all day till they's like, ain't there a church closer by you? I'm like, well, there is, but I feel at home there. That's my church.
For God put. I mean, you look when Miss Carol was alive, Jeff's mom lived in Kissimmee. Before God brought me here, she would drive to Bethany Church in Lakeland because that's where she felt led. And then when God put me here, she wanted to come visit me, and ever since she did, she said this was her church. Until she had her stroke and wasn't able to come back to church. And it was one of those things that, like I said, we get up in the morning. Some of us may be excited about going to work. If you are, just don't tell me because I don't want to beg or act you. But you think of, okay, you sing that song, I owe, that's off to work I go.
Yeah.
And that's the way it's going to be until we don't owe. And then we're still going to have to go to work. But it's one of those things that, I don't know, I look at when it comes to things for God, I get that same excitement as kind of whenever I'm either getting ready for vacation or I know I'm going to go golfing that day. I get excited. And that's the way it is when I come here. And it's like, where's the thing is we do what we want to do, but are our wants lining up with God's, or are they lining up with the flesh? The flesh don't want to do anything for God. Just going to let y'all know that.
Just think though, if the people today existed back then, and complaining to you again.
Oh, this generation wouldn't handle
This
it.
generation could not handle it.
No. Because we're spoiled when it comes to AC, air conditioning.
And having to walk,
Yeah.
that many people back then didn't ride.
No. They don't walk much now. They got remote
You
control.
go across the desert walking, most people are not gonna like it.
Mm-mm. And back in the day with no cars, when you had to go horse and buggy everywhere or something,
But just think before the horse and buggy.
they did what they did here. They walked miles and miles to get to where they needed to be. We don't even do that. I mean, it's one
You
of those
always hear the story, I walked uphill to school both ways.
barefoot, pregnant, and in the snow.
I didn't do that. We had to walk 1 mile and 4/10 to school
Well,
and back. Same.
Walk 3 blocks.
3 blocks. It's amazing to see
And
how spoiled we are.
we all the kids in the neighborhood, and we had fun
Mm-hmm. Yep.
walking to school. We laughed and
Well, you should do things outside. Now everything's
yeah.
handheld.
Kids don't know what outside is.
No. Unless they sit outside on their cell phones.
Yeah, that's old.
It's one of those things that that's. I knew when that technology started coming that it was gonna ruin society, and it has. I mean, I miss the days I didn't have it because then they couldn't find me. I wasn't attached to it. But then we had the pagers when the beepers came out, the pagers.
Yeah.
Didn't I page you? Didn't you get my page? you know, and we thought, oh Lord, now they're trying, and then we get the cell phones, and we thought it was the greatest thing ever. And if they go back to the old flip phones and not have these smartphones, you'd see a difference. It's but it is sad to see, and like I said, it's just gonna get worse. I'm telling y'all right now, people can say they like it. I don't want anything to do with it. This new AI technology stuff, they showed on the news the other day that all they have to have is a picture of you.
Yep.
And some kind of recording of your voice, just one word. And they can make an entire video of you talking. Okay, and now a lot of these places, they'll call you, and you think it's a scam, and they say, hey, can you hear me? And you say yes, they recorded your voice, and now they're gonna start using you and ruining your identity and your credit because you just said yes and it's your voice. And a lot of these people that you talk to are not people, they're AI. Okay, so yes, that is the worst thing that's ever happened. And now they're putting them in cell phones automatically. Like they have a new version of the one I have, but I'm still 2 versions behind it. That the new version automatically has it in it whether you want it or not. So I'm gonna stay lower than that as long as I can, because I don't want it. I think it's gonna hurt us more than it's gonna help us. And it's scary and it's sad that we've come to that point.
We lived a year between when we lived in Kentucky and then down here, and back in Ohio, and we were in Amish country there, and that is an amazing kind of life. I mean, you think about it, it's the life that used to be, and I mean, to just look at the way they have to harness up a horse to pull their buggy.
Yep.
That's more work than most people do in a week.
And most of them are very healthy.
Yeah, oh yeah.
And their food is amazing. Love Amish food.
And have 13 kids.
Well, they got time. They need help on the farm, so they got to find their own help. They grow their help.
This one lady came, well, the group of them came to our house when we were downsizing to come here. And there's all these little kids running around everywhere, you know, and I got to talking to her pretty soon. I said, just how many of these are yours? And I thought maybe they were nieces and nephews or whatever. And she says, all of them.
Oh my gosh.
She was 52 years old, and the youngest one was 3.
Oh my gosh.
Wow. And she had 13.
13. They
But
probably
she-
didn't get any money from the government because they are like
Probably not, no.
self-dependent on what they do. Their own communities. It's amazing. All right. Next section is God provided or proved that He can meet any need. I don't know why He has to prove that, because we should already know that. So despite the grumbling of His people and the fulfillment of His promise in verse 12, the Lord continued to provide for their needs and surprised them with His goodness. The evening quail covered the camp, and the next morning the ground was covered with manna. Quail was not a regular part of the Israeli diet, but would be granted to them at special times and during seasonal migrations. In fact, the tender meat of quail was considered a delicacy. Beyond the quail and its rare occurrence, the Lord continually provided the manna, which was left behind when the dew dried in the morning. So what is it? Which is the literal meaning of the word manna? So the question provided Moses more opportunities to teach the people about God and His faithfulness. From other scriptures, one can gather that manna was likely a flaky, granular substance that could be ground into flour and used for making bread. While some have tried to explain manna naturally, the truth is that it is unexplainable, because it was a substance that was provided directly from God. Nothing you and I can do to replicate it. Nothing we can do to say, oh Lord, this is what it is. God is able to supply all of our needs. We need to always remember that. So the Lord was meticulous in His instructions for gathering and using the manna. Now, for instance, the people were to gather an omer for each person each morning, likely a measurement of about 2 quarts. Now, this was as much manna as one could eat each day. Now, everyone had the same amount regardless of their ability or social status. This was done in order that none was left over from the day to day, but everyone's needs were met. When the instructions were not followed, the manna was infested with maggots and stank because they didn't listen. Enough fell for one day, then the heat of the day melted anything that was not gathered. So which of God's instructions do you find difficult to follow? And don't say, I follow them all. So what instructions from God do you find difficult to follow?
Being still.
I find
Being
it
still?
hard to find time to just sit down and read the Bible.
Yeah, kind of goes with what Brandon just said, being still. Just
I'm constantly doing something.
Yeah.
Going to talk to that person.
what's that?
Going to talk to that person.
Going to talk to somebody? Anybody else? What instructions from God do you find difficult to follow?
You said it for me, Pastor, said being still and letting him work. Stepping out, allowing him to step in. That's the problem I have.
Forgiving's okay, but forgetting.
That's the hardest part.
Yeah.
That's what we have to do. Because if we don't,
little
and people's
things
like, no, you
bring
don't
it
have to
back
forget.
up.
Yeah, you do, because if not, you're going to keep remembering it, you're going to keep bringing it back up, and you're going to keep having those feelings.
Yeah.
So that's hard.
I say tithes and offering,
Tithes and offerings.
which I learned that this weekend. Tithes and offering, because we feel like, okay, if I give this much, like, you know, I gotta pay this, but we don't trust that he's going to fulfill the blessings as well, you know, when we're faithful to that. So,
I
I
had
just
some,
didn't even think about how the light bill got paid, the water bill got paid before I tithed. Somebody paid it, but it wasn't me, until I realized I had to do that. And my son said he can't afford to tithe. I said, you tried for a while.
I did a message a
Or not
long
to.
time ago.
Yeah.
I think it was probably my first that I ever preached, because a lady, she's gone to be with the Lord now, and I can't remember where it's at. Because I gave her my notes, and she gave them back to me like 3 years ago. And it was on, you can't afford not to tithe. And I used an illustration where I took brownies and I put them in individual bags and labeled them like car payment, house payment, and did all that. And then at the very end, I had a thing with just a couple crumbs in it. And I said, God's payment. So we tend to give God what's left.
When you get your check, if you write the tithe first.
Give God first.
Before you do any bills, you'll have money left.
It's amazing.
It is.
And for years, I used to, and this, everybody's different, you do what you feel led. I used to tithe off on the net, which is what I brought home, but not what I made.
Yeah.
Which my dad always said, well, if you did that, then when you do your income tax, if you get any money back, you gotta tithe off that, because you didn't throughout the year. But I've been, for the last, oh my goodness, 20 years, I tithe off my gross, and then some. Because I don't even look, I just round up, pass. Some people are like, right, I'm like, what if God was like that with us? Exactly, no. God's only asking 10% back, he's letting you keep 90. And we still gripe and complain at times, and I had a family member one day, I don't have the money to tithe. Well, you better start. I ain't got it. Then boom, something happened to their car. I said, God's gonna get your money that was supposed to go to the church, but it might end up going somewhere else. So if you want the church to have it, give it to the church first. God will take care of the rest of the stuff. He supplies our needs. Notice there's a difference in the word needs and the word wants. Okay? But I've also found that God also gives our wants at times. Because and he wants a cheerful giver. He doesn't want you to, oh gosh, I gotta write out my tithes check. God don't need it. He wants a cheerful giver. He wants somebody that's excited. And I tell you all the time, you can't outgive him, but it's fun to try. So just try it. Make it a game. Make it a game. Say, God, I'm gonna do this. Don't want nothing in return, Lord, but he's still going to. because that's just how God is.
Can I say something too? I was talking to Pastor Jimmy about, I've been doing a Bible study, like spending a week on each commandment. And when I got to the 8th commandment, it says, thou shalt not steal. Well, stealing, not giving your tithes and offering to the church is the same thing as stealing, because you're stealing from God. And it took me a while to like, I was just like, whoa, like, are you kidding me? Because, you know, they were saying like, this is like, you know, this is the one commandment that most people say, oh yeah, I don't do it. You know, I've never stolen from anybody. I haven't done this. And I'm telling you, if you dive deep into the 8th commandment, you're going to realize that there's so much stuff that we do that is considered stealing in God's eyes. And it's like, and we are sitting down, walking around thinking that we're not stealing, and we are. It's like something so simple, but it's like, it opens up your mind, like your heart too, because you're like, God's kind of getting a hold of you, so that, you know, to give you that knowledge, you know, that you're stealing, you know, from the church, from God, you know. So yeah, it opened up my eyes. So I was shocked. I don't steal. You do, you know. So. And
then Malachi tells us that we rob God with our tithes and offerings. Mm-hmm. Offerings is not money. That's your time, your ability, your talents, your gifts. So we get caught up and don't even think about it. You know, it's when you look at I'm trying to remember exactly how the Florida State statute reads, theft, but it's depriving somebody of the use of something, basically. You think about God. He created us for His purpose. When we don't give Him a reasonable service, we are depriving Him of us being servants. We're stealing. And if you go on to read the New Testament, it says thieves will not enter the kingdom of heaven. We associate thieves as somebody stealing from somebody or robbing a bank. No, thieves is us stealing from God, that when we're to give God our time, our talents, our gifts. So that's, maybe one day, Lord, let me do a study on that. One day. So in verse 22 through 31, there's more guidelines that were given regarding the man and the Sabbath day, as originally laid out back in verse 5. The Israelites obeyed the orders of Moses regarding the 6th day and gathered twice as much as a typical day. So in their obedience, God preserved it. Notice how when they did it, when it wasn't God telling them to do it, it turned to maggots. You know, maggots filled it. But these 2 days, God kept it because He knew they were not allowed to do anything on the Sabbath. So beyond the temporal lessons, this also reinforced the Sabbath day of rest because they were not to gather any on the Sabbath. Some of them went out on the Sabbath anyway, but there was no manna to be found. So the people learned to rest on the 7th day and obey God's instructions. God instituted the Sabbath because people need to set aside time for worship and rest. So what happens when people neglect worship and rest? What do you think happens?
They're weak.
They're weak. People will start having issues.
It makes a long week.
It does. People start having issues in their personal lives, whether they be health, financial, relational. Then you got to remember, your sin just don't affect you or me. It affects everybody. You know, when we sin, there's consequences that everybody else is going to feel. So we have to be careful that we don't neglect worship and rest. The problem with the church today, they interpret this totally different. They interpret it the way they want to interpret it. Some believe I can sit at home and watch it on TV and I'm good. Read what the Bible says. It says not to forsake the assembly of ourselves together. How can we assemble together at your house when we're at church and you're at your house? But granted, that's there for those that physically might not be able to make it there that day. Maybe they're at work, maybe they're sick. You know, maybe they're in the hospital. God understands those. But it's when we choose to just sit at home because we don't feel like going out. And then there's many churches today that one service and that's it. One service Sunday morning, nothing Sunday night, no Sunday school, just one service and nothing during the week. I mean, trust me, I hated canceling Wednesday. And I paid for that, but I was not feeling well, I wasn't able. And it was just like, man, I already know how hard it is to get through the week without one day of coming together. I don't see how these churches do it, but then they always bring up, well, it don't say in the Bible to go to church every day and do it. No. But God set one day specifically aside. Wednesday's a bonus. You know, Wednesday's a bonus for you to help you get through the rest of the week. But we can't even, Sundays is just like people are just so, but they want, when they pray, everything they bring before God, they want, and want. And God sat there going, well, when are you going to do for me? I wish he would do that, but he doesn't. So we just got to learn that we got to make sure that we're giving God a reasonable service. How many years did the children of Israel eat manna?
Over 40.
40 years. Same diet. But when it comes from heaven, it's good. You know? So they did it for 40 years because God sustained them through the manna. Now, Aaron was instructed to keep a jar of manna as a memorial of the Lord and his provision. Now, this jar would also serve as a teaching point for the parents and grandparents to pass down to the following generations. So what was in that jar never went bad, because God told him to do it. Listen, whatever God tells you to do, never going to be wrong. Never going to go bad. So it appears that manna was wholly different from any natural product which we are acquainted with. Some commentators have tried to pinpoint its exact nature and make comparisons, but it was a substance like no other. While the name seems to come from a Hebrew word meaning, what is it? It is also related to a Hebrew term which means to allot or an allotment. So this allotment was furnished daily with the expectation of Sabbath days for all the years of the Israelites' desert wanderings. So even with this daily gift from heaven, the Israelites eventually grew bitter and complained to the Lord about their lack of meat, vegetables, and fruit. Man, we do the same thing. We got a hot dog, but it ain't a steak, so we get upset. But it's a tube steak, so look at it that way. It'll help you get through it. When they finally crossed the Jordan, the manna ceased. Beyond sustaining the Israelites' physical needs, manna served to expose the Israelites' weaknesses and their lack of trust in God, and demonstrated their need for spiritual food. The fact that Jesus referred to manna when he described himself as the bread from heaven reveals the true significance of this substance. Revelations 2:17 may refer to the Lord as the hidden manna coming down from heaven. So the Israelites also became distressed because of the lack of water. So they once again quarreled with Moses. Some believe by scholars that it was possible site of Mount Sinai when they did this. So the wording of Exodus 17:2 seems to indicate a worse response than the previous quarreling. They tested the Lord's patience by doubting his provision and care, saying, "Is he among us or not?" Wow, now they're getting downright low, with their complaining. The Israelites were dealing with the problem by grumbling, complaining, and testing the Lord. Moses showed a better way when he cried out to the Lord. Dependence on the Lord for his provision was difficult for the Israelites to learn. God's patience, rather than his anger, was on display again in chapter 17, verses 5 and 6. He instructed Moses to use the rod to strike a rock and produce water for his people. God did this miracle through Moses in the presence of the elders of the people. Because this was one of the locations where the Israelites tested and questioned God, Moses named the place Massah, which means testing, and Meribah, which means quarreling. So the double-barreled name reflected the verbs used to describe the Israelites. We must not let difficulty cause us to doubt God's presence, because he's promised to never leave us nor forsake us. Now this event was also mentioned by Paul in 1 Corinthians 10, suggesting that Christ, the pre-existent one, was the one who sustained the Israelites with food and water. Both metaphors provide pictures of Christ as the living bread and the living water. Jesus is the only one that can satisfy every need that you ever will have. You won't get anything from this world that can do that. Nothing. It only comes from Him. So you got to trust Him and obey Him. Because remember the song, trust and obey, there's no other way to be happy but to trust and obey. So when you see somebody walking around miserable, one or two things, they ain't trusting and they ain't obeying. Or they just ain't saved. So it's one of those things. But just never doubt the Lord will always supply whatever we need. And if we're good, He might even supply our wants at times. Anybody got anything? Everybody good? Everybody awake? Alert?
That 40 years, they eat that in the desert, it's a long time.
That's a long time.
What did they eat when they came out of, they had to prepare their own food? What did they do?
They started growing it in the promised land.
Yourselves.
Yeah, they started doing their own, they all went and had their own little things. But while they were from Egypt to the promised land, God took care of them.
I guess they remembered Adam then when they had to, everything from the ground.
It's amazing to see what God can do. He did that for them for 40 years. Even while they were disobeying, He still took care of them. You know, aren't you glad He still does that for us? When we disobey Him, He still takes care of us. We don't deserve it, by no means. But that's God's
They were
love.
not even from the Greeks, the Turks, and all that stuff.
It's crazy.
Manna is a type of bread.
It can be. They have never pinpointed what they thought, but it was something from God. And that's why when they refer to it as the bread, that's why Jesus is referred to as that being the manna, the bread of life. We don't know if it's something they had to make into bread. We don't know if it's something just they got out there and was able to eat it. We don't know.
It fell from the sky.
It was from heaven. It was from God. And then they got quail. So they had quail and manna every day for 40 years. They probably didn't have salt or pepper. They didn't have ketchup. They didn't have mayonnaise. They didn't have all these extra hot sauces like we. That's what they ate. But when it comes from heaven, it's got to be perfect. Something we've never had before. That's why they asked the question, what is the best thing you ever eaten? It won't compare to anything that God gives. So we just got to remember that.
My grandson's dating this Jewish girl. Do they do the Passover now? That's what the Jewish people do. Well, he's dating this girl and they're doing the Passover. And he's a mom about to starve to death because everything is no flavoring and no nothing.
Yeah, they do a lot of stuff without leaven.
You better remember Jesus. Don't forget Him.
That is the truth. All right, Heavenly Father, we want to thank You for allowing us to be here this morning, Lord. I thank You for always providing our needs, even when we don't deserve it or are not worthy. I thank You that You've never given up on us, that You've never left us. You promised to never forsake us. So, Lord, help us to start doing our part. Help us, Lord, to really search in ourselves, to start giving You a reasonable service. Help us, Lord, in those areas that we find it hard to follow and obey. And I pray, Lord, that You'll bless us today as we go in to worship You, that Your Spirit will dwell among us, within us, and through us. And Lord, if there be one here this morning that's lost, I pray that You would bring them, Lord, to the cross so they can be wonderfully saved. Again, we ask that You would also be with Chad Anderson and Greg Smith, Lord, as they heal, and those that were also involved, Lord. I pray that through that situation, many will be turned to You, and something will get said or done, Lord, that souls will be saved through that. Lord, we love You, we thank You, and we ask all of this in Your name we pray. Amen.